Hi, everyone. My name is Nathan Rowe. I'm going to briefly go over this ES verification tool that I developed and kind of explain its purpose and what you can use it for. So the overall idea of this tool is to determine what supporting data there is for ecological sites. So that can be used broadly for whatever purposes. And one specific application for it is ES verification projects, which it's built a little bit around that and makes it easier to determine um, whether you're passing verification projects and what required fields there are and things like that. So to access this app, you can go to this URL here. And at the top left of the app, there are instructions for how to run it. I'll go through those step by step and explain a little more detail in this video. So the first step is to enter an ecological site ID into section A. So section A is right here. There are two options for entering an ecological site ID. You can either use drop downs for the MLRA and ecological site ID, or you can go to and just enter the ecological site ID manually. So I like the idea of having these drop downs. It makes it easier for folks who are less familiar with these codes, and they can actually search for actual descriptions of these sites. And then you can hit fetch data here. So step one, enter an ecological site ID in section A. Step two, click fetch data and wait for load. So we'll load that, and I'll demonstrate also using this other option for searching for ecological sites as well. So on the bottom right, you can see that it's fetching data and it shows you the progress that it's making. This is a fairly large ecological site, so this is taking a little bit longer than what I see most ecological sites take. So once this loads, we'll see up in the top here, it will give some feedback, and it says some data failed to load. Veg transect, no data associated with this ecological site ID. Veg transect summary, no data associated with this ecological site ID. So that means that for F018XI200CA, there's no veg transect data and there's no veg transect summary data either. Now, the reason there's two different ways of searching for ecological sites is that for some MLRAs, they're using the new, let's see here. Sometimes you have to click things a couple of times, but so now we're seeing, I chose a different MLRA. It's the Northern Pacific Coast Range, foothills and valleys. And then when I click to look at the ecological site ID, you can see these are new using the new ecological site IDs. And what I've seen with some of the sites that have new ecological site IDs is that edits using the new ecological site ID, but NASAS, the actual site correlations, are based on the old ecological site ID. So when you fetch for that data, you don't actually find any. And so if that happens, you could come down here and enter the old ecological site ID, which wouldn't be an option to choose in the drop-down menu. So to demonstrate this, I'll just enter a different ecological site ID here. I'll hit fetch data. You'll see that it blurs out everything that was already reported so that you don't mistake what site you're working on. All right, so I just clicked fetch data and waited for it to load. It came back with a message that there's no veg transect summary data for this ecological site. Then we will go to step 4, choose filtering criteria if desired in section C. Or sorry, choose required fields in section B. We're on step 3. So for the required fields, there's the site table, the veg plot table, the plot plant inventory table, veg transect, and veg transect summary. In each of these, there are fields that are associated with those tables, and they do go beyond. It's not an exact mapping to the NASAS tables, but it's pretty close, and it avoids having some small kind of child tables that would require showing a bunch of different tables on the display here. So when you go to site, you can see various different fields that are required, and if they have a check mark next to them, they're required. And the default here is based on the Southwest region's medium intensity. So if you want to change that, you can just unclick things that you don't want to be required fields. So that exists in all these different tables. And you will notice that some of these choices are grouped. So for example, strata here. Strata has several different fields in it: height class upper, height class lower, and so on. So the way that it's set right now, strata is one required field. And any of these options that are selected will satisfy the field for strata. Now, if you didn't want to consider some of these options as satisfying the required field of strata, you could unselect them. For example, let's say AK stratum cover class and plant type group. If you considered those unsatisfactory, you could uncheck them, and those would no longer satisfy the criteria for having data populated for strata. So that's step 3. And now for step 4, choose the filtering criteria if desired in section C. So then we come down to section C, and you can see there are a few different filtering criteria. There's site observations from, and this is a date range of when the sites were sampled. There's a state ID and a community phase ID, and then there's a user site ID. So to begin with, I'm just going to bring up as much data as possible. So the date range is always from this 1912 date up to today's date. And if you want to change that, you can do so. So I'll just hit filter and map data here, which is step 5. Click filter and display data. So we'll click this. This brings up our data. And now we'll see, we have a few different tabs here: EcoSite, Map Site, VegPlot, Plot Plan Inventory, Veg Transect, and Veg Transect Summary. So the EcoSite tab is some overview information. And here we can see it. There's a check mark here, and it says 108 sites with vegetation plots are correlated to R18 XI 101CA. A minimum of 20 are required. And this is based off ES verification requirements. And I believe it's 5 components are required, or sorry, 5 observations are required for each component. And so this does take into consideration how many components are correlated to your site. So if you had fewer than 4 components correlated to your site, you'd have less than 20 required sites, and it would report that here. Sorry about that. Okay, moving on, it says the following states and phases from the edit STM are not represented in the site data: 1.2 and 2.1. So this is looking at edit data, and it's looking at what states and phases exist in the edit data. And it's then looking at NASAS data in the site observation table to determine, are all the states and phases reported in the edit STM also represented in the NASAS data? And it's saying no, a couple of these states and phases are not represented. Then we have a summary table here, summary of sites passing criteria. So the criteria is the selection that we put in here. So all these fields being required. And so for the site table, based on the criteria that was chosen for the site table, there are 108 sites, and 44 of those sites are passing. For the veg plot, there are 77 sites with a veg plot and 0 are passing. For plot plant inventory, there are 77 sites with a plot plant inventory table, and 37 of those are passing, and so on. For the state and phase table, which says gray cells do not exist in the edit STM, this is coming back to this message here about what states and phases are represented. So if we look here, we can see the rows are states and the columns are phases. And so state 1, phase 1 has 5 observations. State 1, phase 2 has 0 observations. State 2, phase 1 has 0 observations. The cells that are grayed out are not actually in the STM. That doesn't mean it's not possible that there's data there, because there aren't really constraints in how you enter that data in the site observation table. So I do include them. And what you do see here is that there are 103 sites with no state and no phase. So then we see these histograms which give a little bit more detail related to this table here, the summary of sites passing criteria. So this is pretty black and white, the number of sites and the number passing. So we see that only 4 are passing in the site table, and we see a little more detail here. So here's the distribution of our sites, and we can see here that 4 sites are 100% passing, and then we have just a couple that are in the 90 and 80% complete, and then we start ramping up a little bit more. So we've got like 8 sites that are 70% complete, 18 sites about that are 60% complete, and then close to 35 sites that are 50% complete. So this gives you a little bit more idea about how much more information you need to get these sites up to passing criteria. And again, this is all based on the criteria that you selected here. So the same information is displayed for all the other tables in terms of the distribution of the completeness. So that's the EcoSite tab. Now we can look at the Map tab. This maps your ecological site. It gives you an idea of the overall extent of the site and whether you have observations. So let's zoom in a little bit and we'll see that in purple, these are generalized map unit delineations. So obviously these aren't the actual delineations, but it's kind of a rough approximation that just loads a bit faster. So it's really intended more to understand the extent of the distribution, both at its full extent and also in kind of these more regional extents. You can see this site is kind of spread across 3 different areas. You'll see that that the actual sites, those are represented in orange. You can click them and see what the site ID is, what the EcoSite is, should be the EcoSite that you searched, and the state and phase. You can turn certain things off. So if you want to turn the polygons off or you want to turn the points off, you can do that. You can change this to look at satellite imagery, or you can look at topography. And when you do that, just keep in mind that the polygons are not exact, but the locations of the points are. So if you want to get a sense, you know, this is supposed to be up on top of a plateau. So, you know, seeing that, okay, all of these are on top of this feature as they should be. So that's the Map tab. The Site tab, as well as kind of, and this shares properties with all the other tables here. So I'll scroll down a little bit. We can see first there's a passing. Is it passing or not? There's an X, so not passing. Percent complete. We've got 46% complete. This one's 58% complete. The number of columns required. We have 26 columns selected in this, in our choice for the site table. The number of columns missing, 14. And then it goes and shows the site ID and lots of different properties associated with the site table. When we scroll across, we see in purple, this shows required fields that are not populated. So we see veg plot size is required for several of these that's not populated. Aspect is not populated for some. The geomorphic component is not populated for some of these. So one thing that you might do is sort by the percent complete. So these are low completion, and hit that again. We go to high completion. And so what you might do is determine, you know, what sites are close to being complete and can we get them over the threshold to being in the complete status. So we'll see that for these which are passing 100% complete, there's nothing highlighted. There are no missing fields that are required. But as we scroll down, we start seeing this only has 88% of completion. It needs veg plot size. It needs an EcoState name and an EcoState and a community phase name. So the other tables have the same general properties, veg plot, you know, based on your selection of what are required fields in veg plot. This is going to tell you what percent complete you are you passing, how many columns are required, how many columns are missing, and what are those columns that are missing. Now, one thing that I've found useful to do is let's filter this to see things that are close to being completed. So the highest that we have is 69% completion here. I will copy this user site ID. I'll enter that down in the user site ID filtering section, and then I'll filter and map data. So then when I go to the map, I'll see I only have this one yellow dot. That's my site there. When I go to the site table, I see, okay, I do have 100% completion there. It was a veg plot that I had kind of sorted by, so that's 69% complete. And then when I look at plot plant inventory, I see that I have 100% completion on all of the columns for plot plant inventory. Veg transect, I do have veg transect. It's only 40% complete. I'm missing veg transect azimuth, veg transect length, and the total points sampled. So those could hopefully be populated. Now we already saw there's no veg transect summary data associated with this site. So that's the overall idea. The one we can delete this and look at all of our sites now, and I can show you how to use the state ID and community phase ID. So let's come back to the map and we'll enter in. We already know that we only have state 1 and community phase 1 represented in this data. So let's see where those sites are. So now we're looking at the map. We see all 5 of those are in this area. They kind of split here. We've got a couple observations up here, and we have a few observations down here. We can go and look at site. So most of these are passing in the site table. This one has an 88% completeness. It needs a veg plot size. It needs an eco state name and a community phase name. So those are pretty easy. You should be able to get those completed. Veg plot. This needs a little bit of work. Plot plant inventory. A lot of these have the same percent completion, so we see that that they don't have something satisfying strata in there. So something related to strata needs to be populated. So that's the general idea of this tool. If you have any comments about it, if you run into any issues or anything like that, contact me. You can email me or Teams me or anything like that. And hopefully it's useful for verification projects as well as just generally trying to understand what data is available for ecological sites. All right, thanks, bye.